of the Ghouta chemical weapons attack of 2013. A painful reminder of the suffering endured by Syrian civilians and of the grave abuses and violations of international law that must never be repeated. As we reflect, I urge this Council to redouble its efforts towards accountability, protection of civilians, and renewed commitment to helping Syria emerge from a dark past towards a brighter future. Mr. President, turning to this month's developments, let me at the outset welcome the clear and united message from the Security Council in your 10 August presidential statement following last month's horrific escalation in Sweden. While violence there has largely subsided following a ceasefire, the threat of renewed conflict is ever present, as are the political centrifugal forces that threaten Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity. Mr. President, in Sweden, the ceasefire agreed on 19 July has come under strain, but so far has prevented a slide back into open conflict. I welcome the efforts of the US, Jordan, and Syrian authorities in forming a trilateral working group to support the ceasefire. That said, we are still seeing dangerous hostilities and skirmishes on the margins of Sweden, and violence could resume at any moment. Absent more tangible and binding measures, including to build confidence, the ceasefire risks remaining fragile, an interim truce rather than the foundation for lasting stability. Israel's airstrikes have subsided following the latest ceasefire, but IDF ground operations in southwest Syria have continued. Such actions are unacceptable. We must insist on full respect for Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, underscored by adherence to the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. I welcome a ministerial level meeting between Syria and Israel in Paris this week. There is clear scope to address the issues diplomatically and without further confrontation. Mr. President, tragically, the humanitarian cost of recent violence has only escalated. Over 185,000 people have been displaced across Sweda, Dara, and the rural Damascus and beyond. Many are living in precarious conditions with extensive damage to infrastructure compounding their plight. Commercial and humanitarian access challenges to enter Sweden remain very challenging and often disrupted, with periodic road closures and insecurity at contact points. Emergency Coordinator Fletcher will brief you more in detail on this and UN efforts to scale up emergency efforts. And, Mr. President, I am concerned that the month of relative military calm belies a worsening political climate with escalatory and zero-sum rhetoric hardening among many. Part of this has been fueled by the emergence of further distressing footage of graphic abuses that took place inside Sweden during the escalation. At the same time, the formation of a committee to oversee governance inside Sweden and some individual appeals for support from external parties has fueled accusations of separatist intentions. We are closely monitoring the situation in Sweden and remaining in contact with the parties and communities concerned and encouraging steps towards de-escalation and access. Mr. President, we note the interim authorities' response to Sweden, including a statement of condemnation after footage emerged showing the execution of an unarmed man in the medical uniform in Sveda National Hospital. The interim Ministry of Justice also announced the formation of a fact-finding committee tasked with investigating the abuses committed in Syria. It is essential that the committee's findings are made fully public and that all perpetrators, regardless of affiliation, are held responsible. These events underscore the urgent need for the interim authority security forces to demonstrate that they are acting solely to protect all Syrians and do not constitute a threat. Moreover, leaders on all sides must take a responsibility to counter divisive narratives and promote a shared vision that reflects the rights and security of all communities in Syria. The recent report of the UN Commission on Inquiry documents ongoing violations in coastal and western central Syria throughout the first months of 2025. The interim authorities have publicly acknowledged this report. Its conclusions underline the urgent need for transitional justice measures. Progress cannot be delayed. The separate report submitted last month to President Shara by the Syrian Committee for Investigating and Fact-Finding must be published. Justice for victims and accountability for all perpetrators, regardless of affiliation, are binding obligations under international laws and standards and under the Constitutional Declaration. Mr. President, if future violence and violations are to be avoided, a serious program on security sector reform and on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration is clearly needed, as also called for in the UN Commission of Inquiry report. Mr. President, let me join you and the Security Council in underlining the importance of countering all forms of terrorism in Syria and expressing grave concern over the acute threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters at large in Syria. The Syrian authorities have made commitments and taken actions to counter ISIL and Al-Qaeda, and it is vital that they take the decisive measures to address the threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters. Mr. President, as the Council reaffirmed, an inclusive Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process based on the key principles listed in Resolution 2254 is essential, one that safeguards the rights of all, protects all, meets the legitimate aspirations of all, and enables the Syrian people to determine their own future peacefully, independently, and democratically. In this regard, I note yesterday's publication of the decree that establishes a framework for holding indirect elections for 2/3 of the members of the Interim People's Assembly. My office continues to engage with the Supreme Committee for Elections on their work, and we now await confirmation of the electoral timeframe and the distribution of seats across governorates. I reiterate my previous recommendations. Success in this process demands measures that ensure transparency and openness, and where all major Syrian groups, not just trusted individuals, are included as electors and candidates with the equal and visible participation of women. We recognize that this is a major challenge in areas where disputes remain with the central authorities, but anything less would entrench skepticism, aggravate the forces pulling Syria apart, and impede reconciliation. Moreover, Mr. President, Syria needs to feel that this transition is not a series of ad hoc arrangements and isolated institutions, but a clear and comprehensive path based on inclusion and transparency to implement the principles of Resolution 2254, culminating in a new constitution drafted through popular consensus and resulting in free and fair elections. I hope that the interim authorities can respond to the gravity of the challenge with a clear vision for a path forward, taking bold moves and course recorrections where necessary. As part of this, I urge comprehensive and institutionalized engagement with all communities and leaders, including those critical of the interim authorities, in the spirit of real compromise. Equally, I remind the leadership of other Syrian constituencies and communities of their responsibility to show that they want to be part of a united Syria and are willing to engage in action and not just in word, in a peaceful transition that restores Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity. Mr. President, let me here say a word on the Northeast, where efforts continue to implement the 10th March agreement. Attempts to convene the two sides outside of Syria continued, but were not successful so far. We have also seen concerning spikes of violence between interim security forces and the SDF during August in Aleppo Governorate. We do welcome reported further contacts between interim authority officials and SDF representatives. I hope that such contacts can be cemented into real compromise, and we are continuing to engage both sides on the importance of this and the need for urgent substantive progress on the agreed goal of implementing the 10th March agreement before the end of the year. Mr. President, my office continues to hold regular consultations through the Civil Society Support Room with a broad range of Syrian civil society organizations active in strengthening community dialogue, social cohesion, and service delivery in all parts of Syria. I encourage the interim authorities to create an enabling environment for civil society initiatives and dialogue, which are essential for promoting inclusion, transparency, and legitimacy in the transitional process. Mr. President, my office also hears from Syrian women who continue to stress the necessity of women's meaningful political participation. But we also learn from these women the fears associated with their political participation and engagement, including concerns stemming from threats to personal security and social pressure to refrain from political engagement. Mr. President, as we look toward the voluntarily safe and dignified return of refugees and IDPs to their homes, let me stress the need for sustained and coordinated support for Syria's reconstruction and rehabilitation of its infrastructure. The damage to physical assets, social systems, and livelihoods remains profound. Syria needs tangible international support of an epic scale. Recent decisions to lift certain sanctions represent a significant step in this regard. But these measures must be sustained and broadened, accompanied by substantial funding to reinforce their impact for recovery and reconstruction. And Mr. President, it remains the case that the best way to secure such support is through a genuine political transition that lays the path for long-term stability and sustainable governance. Indeed, without credible reforms, stronger institutions, and a firm commitment to the rule of law, international support risks being squandered or misdirected. To conclude, Mr. President, despite worrying security incidents, the situation has been relatively calmer this month, and I applaud the efforts of all involved in quelling military hostilities. But the country remains deeply fragile, and the transition remains on a knife edge. Across the range of issues in the political transition, including the People's Assembly, the constitutional issues, security sector reform and disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, transitional justice, and the peaceful integration of all parts of Syria and the restoration of Syria's sovereignty and unity, the United Nations is working to support a credible, inclusive, and transparent process, working with the Syrian authorities